When I previewed South of Midnight earlier this year, I walked away pleasantly surprised. With just a glimpse of Hazel's story in a gothic fantasy version of the American Deep South, Compulsion Games convinced me that they were working on something full of creativity, personality, and charm. After completing the nearly 12-hour story campaign last week, I would describe South of Midnight as a flawed but fun ride that captures the beauty and essence of Southern fables and culture. Does this mean it's a good Compulsion title? Let's answer that question and more right now. South of Midnight is a third-person perspective action-adventure game with a narrative spanning 14 chapters. The story revolves around the lead female protagonist and hometown Prospero native Hazel Flood, voiced by Adrienne Ray, a.k.a. Brittany Pitts from the Paramount reboot The Game. Hazel embarks on a life-altering quest to find her mom after they are separated during an intense hurricane. While on her journey, Hazel meets a ghost weaver from the past named Mahalia and unlocks weaving abilities of her own. She also uncovers deep and dark family secrets and encounters several mythical creatures with stories behind their origins. This storyline, penned by David Sears, achieves the goal of honoring the South. This is something that initially drew me to the game because I have lived in Atlanta, Georgia for the last 19 years, and I wanted to see how they would capture Southern culture and folklore. Every character you meet, including Catfish, who also narrates the story between chapters, performs effortlessly and embodies the soul and spirit of this region. This game also does a good job of expressing the importance of relationships and facing setbacks head-on instead of keeping these emotions bottled up inside. Where the narrative falls short is in how the final 2 chapters are wrapped up. While there are some interesting revelations along the way, there is a level of predictability in how certain events play out, and the ending feels very rushed. This is disappointing, given how much we learn about Hazel and other characters up to this point, but it also will be interesting to see if Compulsion decides to revisit this world in the future if the game is considered a success. Moving on to graphics. South of Midnight is built entirely in Unreal Engine 5 and looks phenomenal from start to finish. The game runs at 60 frames per second. Both the countryside landscape and world architecture match the authenticity of the Southern setting. The character models remain perfectly aligned with the signature art style used for the animation performances. If you aren't a fan of the stop-motion animation, you can turn this off for gameplay, but it will still be displayed during cutscenes. Playing on the Xbox Series X, I didn't experience any known issues or performance hiccups during my entire playthrough. There will of course be a standard Day 1 patch to address any known issues that might be present in the game, but everything ran pretty smoothly for me. Now let's get into gameplay and address some of my pros and cons. Combat, traversal, and exploration are the 3 core pillars that define the overall gameplay experience. What I love about traversal is that Hazel can double jump, glide, climb, dodge, and wall run throughout key moments in the campaign. You unlock these abilities as you naturally progress through the storyline, and these moves can also be combined in combat scenarios for more versatility when outmaneuvering foes. Speaking of combat, Hazel acquires hooks early on in the campaign that can be used to hack and slash Haints after weaving, strand pushing, strand pulling, and stunning them when you enter a combat arena. Once their health bar is fully depleted, you unravel them by pressing the Y button. There are green healing items that you can use at any time in these areas, and successfully unraveling enemies can gradually restore your health bar. While the combat gets easier as you continue to unlock skills and dodge attacks, the repetition of entering these combat arenas gets pretty old fairly quickly. There is some variation on the types of haunts you fight, which is good, but these fights happen far too often and make things feel a little stale and predictable. The level of progression on these attacks are also equally disappointing and add very little excitement, if any, to the combat mechanics as a whole. In addition to haints, there are some pretty cool boss fights to look forward to later in the game. Some of these bosses are considered mythical creatures that you have already seen in the trailers, and most of these fights require studying their attack patterns and hurling nearby objects at them to disorient and then hack and slash their weak points. Every boss fight ends with Hazel using the Unravel ability to shut them down. My one issue with the boss fights is that the final boss encounter is significantly weaker than the others and is more of a rehash of the same recycled combat fights I mentioned already. This adds to the same frustration I expressed before with how the final 2 chapters are wrapped up. The way this conclusion was handled feels rushed, and you can tell there was a lot of thought put into the previous boss fights as opposed to this one. Staying on topic of mythical creatures, they aren't all hostile. Like Benji, a handful of them need your help and have traumatic backstories about how they came to be creatures. These stories are very well explained and require unraveling stigmas in various areas. After unraveling each stigma, you uncover a key moment from their past and capture these moments in a special bottle. This culminates in a final race to a bottle tree where you are chased by a mysterious fog that growls at you until you reach the end. This entire racing sequence is highly repetitive and happens far too often in the storyline. Certain obstacles are added to each mad dash to make them appear different, but the result remains the same. As someone who studied animation in college, I fully understand how time-consuming it can be and why using the same models and repeating animations keeps costs down. With that said, I think this is another repetitive sequence that may tire out some players, especially if they aren't already emotionally invested in the storyline. The final aspect that I want to mention about gameplay is the attention given to exploration. There are several collectibles in the form of readable documents and lore around characters, creatures, and the world. Observing images gives further backstory details on other characters and fully illustrates their key life moments. Hazel also finds her childhood toy Crouton, which comes to life and can be used to explore areas that Hazel can't fit into. This adds a bit of puzzle solving to the game, as you can summon Crouton and switch between both characters to get past obstacles. In addition to exploring, Crouton can also be used as a weapon against haints by being thrown at them and taking control over them temporarily to attack other haints. This silent but effective toy is a nice fun tool and adds more personality to a cast full of talent and charm. One of the best aspects of South of Midnight is the brilliant soundtrack. The music embodies the soul and spirit of the South with catchy vocals that will leave tunes in your head long after you finish playing the game. It pulls you deeper into the world, and the vibe aligns with every positive and negative that Hazel goes through. As previously mentioned, South of Midnight took me about 12 hours to complete. The standard length is between 10 and 12 hours. If you are a completionist and want to find every collectible, you should be prepared to spend more time replaying chapters. Sadly, there is no New Game Plus option right now, and replaying chapters erases progress made past the point where you are replaying. So with all that said, is South of Midnight a good Compulsion Games title? I would say at best, I would score it a 7. It's filled with memorable characters, an amazing soundtrack, and deeply rooted love and appreciation for Southern culture. While the gameplay combat can get repetitive and the main storyline falters towards the end, Hazel's journey is still entertaining and well worth the short time it will take you to finish. If you enjoyed this review, please consider leaving a comment and giving this video a like. Stay tuned for more content. And until then, take care and have a great morning, afternoon, or evening.